This morning, I'd like to welcome our guest musician, Jarrett Carter. Jarrett, we're so glad to have you here with us this morning again to enrich our service. Jarrett is a very talented professional musician, composer, and teacher whose range of genres runs from jazz and classical to pop, rock, and country. You can learn more about him in your order of service or in person after the close of worship. Jarrett will open our service this morning with the song Witchcraft, written by Cy Coleman and Carolyn Lee. Later in the service, after the Joys and Concerns, Jarrett will share with us the beautiful Rodgers and Hart composition, Bewitched, Bothered, Bewildered. Jarrett, the chancel is yours.
Thank you for having me. Good morning. Good morning.
you so much. That was beautiful. Please hear our opening words written by UU minister Reverend Scott Taylor. We gather as a house of stories, as a shelter shot through with memories that speak, that long for us to listen, without which we easily lose our way. As we learn of those who have gone before, the way in front of us becomes more clear. As we remember what they survived and what they sacrificed for us, for the faceless us who would come after, we find courage far beyond what we could muster on our own. Beneath this seemingly worn-out world, there are wells from which we can drink. Come, let our thirst guide us there. Come, let those sweet ghosts whisper their gifts. And I'd like to invite you in your gray hymnals to turn to hymn number 212. For our opening hymn, we are dancing Sarah's Circle. This hymn is set to the music of the African-American spiritual Jacob's Ladder, if you're familiar with that one. Eileen will play it through once, and then I invite us to sing all verses. All verses. All 5 verses. Our song leaders are going to come up and help us out. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Linda Mowers. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm so happy to serve as your worship leader this morning. Welcome to Buckman Bridge Unitarian Universalist Church, or as we call it more simply, BBUUC. Love those acronyms. We acknowledge that we're here on the traditional lands of the Tamaqua people, who became extinct in the middle of the 18th century. we encourage you to learn more about the history of the indigenous people past and present of Florida and beyond. Whether today is your first or your 1,000th Sunday in our midst, we are stronger because you are with us. We are one people of many beliefs, many origins, ages, sexual identities, and genders. We are all growing, all learning, all loved. Just as you are welcome here. We know you come here for different reasons, to find community, to seek your spiritual and personal truths, to question, to nurture your heart and soul, to be nurtured, to explore new ideas, to find comfort, and perhaps to find the answers to some of your bigger questions. We hope that you will find comfort, connection, challenge, and love here. To those here today who may be guests or newcomers, we are so glad that you're here, and we hope that you'll stay with us for the fellowship after the service. You'll find beverages, including fair trade coffee and snacks at the pass-through windows in the back of the sanctuary. Be sure to wear your name tag so that we can warmly welcome and greet you by name. It's a great time for meeting friends and sharing conversations. Please stop by our welcome table at the entryway if you haven't already done so. There you can find information about our church and our denomination, and we have regularly scheduled Learn About UU and Learn About BBUUC classes year-round. If you have any questions, please find any of our membership folks with a yellow sticker on their name tag that says New, Ask Me. They can also tell you about the path to membership. Get to know us here, and we hope that you will find our beloved community is a home for you. We'd like to bring everyone's attention to the information about upcoming events in your order of service on the church bulletin board, the website, newsletter, and weekly bulletins. We also have many volunteer opportunities, including Sunday morning greeters and refreshment hosts. It's a really fun job. It lets you get to know people and lets people get to know you. Sign-up sheets for those who wish to lend a hand are on the credenza in the entryway. And it just so happens that today there will be additional things to do after the service. As you can see, our annual silent auction kicks off today. So you've got tables set up here. And it's going to run through November 5th. That will be the last day. Check out the excellent goods and services for your bidding pleasure on the tables while enjoying your coffee and refreshments. Now, let me remind you to silence your phones and communication devices as we move into worship, willing to be authentic with each other, honest with ourselves, and open to connection in all its forms. Since Unitarian Universalists don't have a creed or dogma, what holds us together as a community is covenant, the promises we make to one another about who we will be as a faith community and how we will be in relationship with one another as we practice our values. The covenant we created together in our congregation is printed in your order of service, and I invite you now to join me in speaking the words in unison. We covenant to engage one another with honesty, kindness, and respect, to value diversity, seek understanding of our differences, and practice gracious accountability with care, love, and empathy. We make these promises to those who are here and those yet to come, so that we may be a safe, welcoming, and beloved community of acceptance, learning, and transformation. And now I'll invite you to rise in body or spirit and join us with the call to worship. The words are printed in your order of service. I'd like to invite Helen Matt to come forward this morning to light our chalice as I share with you the words of UU minister Reverend Katie Romano Griffin. Come, let us enter this space of hope and community. Come, let us enter this space with our sorrows, our joys, our passion, and compassion. Come, let us enter this space with the stories of our ancestors, for their strength and wisdom beats in our hearts. Come into this space, present to the beloved companions who move beside us. Come into this space, mindful that together we are building a future for other generations. Come into this space and let us worship. And now I'd like to invite Mary Avery to come forward to the pulpit and share with you a story for our time for all ages.
Good morning. This story is called Maria Molina and the Days of the Dead by Kathleen Krull. And the beautiful illustrations are by Enrique O. Sanchez. When I woke up from my nap, I was in the graveyard, but I was not scared. Almost my whole family was there with me, everyone except my abuela, my grandmother, and Pablo, my baby brother. They were buried here. My aunt and uncle were missing too. They lived in the next village and hadn't arrived yet. It was Pablo we were honoring that night. My brother died when he was just a few months old, not big enough to do anything besides laugh and cry and play with a few toys. We will honor his spirit on the first of the Los Días de los Muertos, the Days of the Dead, my mother told me all year. That is the night the angelitos, the little ones, are remembered. Perhaps Pablo will give us a sign to let us know all is well. In the market, I had just enough money to buy one calavera de azúcar, a sugar candy skull, with Pablo's name on it. Now I set it by Pablo's grave with the other offerings. If I lived in the United States, I, Maria Molina, would not be in a graveyard tonight. I would be out trick-or-treating on Halloween with enough money to buy lots of candy and a fancy costume. I drank another cup of hot chocolate and tried to stay awake. I wrapped my serape tighter around me. My father was lighting a black beeswax candle. It lit up our offerings to Pablo. An ear of corn, his favorite toys, a piece of chocolate, many white flowers, and a small pan de los muertos, bread of the dead. We have brought our offerings to you, Pablo, he said softly. Come and be pleased to receive the soul of all that we have. We sat there till morning, surrounded by the sweet smell of incense, talking softly and remembering Pablo. The next day was the second of the Days of the Dead. Today we honor our ancestors, my mother reminded me, your abuela. In the morning, I helped to clean my grandmother's grave and decorate it with wreaths of marigolds, the flower of the dead. We set oranges, sweet pumpkin, peanuts, and a photograph of my abuela on an embroidered tablecloth. In the afternoon, I went back to our house to help my mother prepare grandmother's favorite foods, tortillas with blue corn, tamales wrapped in banana leaves, and mole, a chicken in a sauce of chocolate and chilies. Soon my aunt and uncle did arrive safely. They took me to the market with them to buy more pan de los muertos. Bakery shelves bulged with round loaves of the special bread, glistening with reddish purple or lemon yellow glazes. Some smelled like licorice, some like cinnamon. In the candy stores, piles of sugar skulls grinned at us. I held my aunt's hand tighter. My favorite things in the market were the toys, skeleton puppets that danced on sticks in the wind, brightly decorated masks to scare your friends with, toy coffins with skeletons that popped out when you pulled a string. I let go of my aunt's hand and ran to look at the tiny dolls. They had garbanzo beans for heads and little skeleton bodies doing almost anything you can think of. Taking a bath, getting married, fighting a bull, even marching in a funeral procession. Then it was time to get back to the graveyard. As the darkness fell, we lit candles and began keeping vigil. My father had told me what to say. "We miss you, Abuela," I said softly. "We have brought our offerings. Come and be pleased to receive the soul of what the land has given us." I fell asleep for a while, and when I awoke, the fiesta had begun. After a certain time, they say, the spirits of the dead go away. It is we, the living, who actually get to eat the food. Just as the day had sparkled with colored ribbons, tissue paper decorations, bright flowers, now the night sparkled with black and yellow candles and fireworks. Laughing faces loomed all around. People visited, prayed, gossiped, like a big family reunion. I think the children had the most fun. Perhaps not as much fun as Halloween in the United States, but we were excited to be up so late, excited just to be out of school during these special days. A group of us performed El Baile de los Esqueletos, the dance of the skeletons, with jerky movements skeletons might make. Others told ghost stories, especially about spirits who take ghastly revenge on relatives who don't honor them properly on the days of the dead. As much fun as I was having, I finally did doze off. My father had to carry me home in his arms the next morning as we all went back to our little adobe house. The next year, we got some news. We were all going to live in the United States. My aunt and uncle were coming too. And I, Maria Molina, would celebrate Halloween now. I began thinking of costumes already and of mountains of sugary candy. Still, when I came home from enjoying my first American Halloween, there was something bothering me. "But what about Pablo and Abuela?" I asked my mother. "Do you miss them?" she asked. "We have left their spirits behind," I explained. "No one will honor them anymore. On the days of the dead, they will be so sad." My mother smiled. "We cannot be with them at their graves," she agreed, "but we can still honor them." "How?" I asked. The next night, my parents showed me how. In our apartment, we set up a small ofrenda, or altar. On it, we placed the photograph of my grandmother, my brother's favorite toys, and a bowl of marigolds. My mother baked her own pan de los muertos, and this went on the altar too. All night, we kept vigil. Before I fell asleep, I looked all around at my family, and it was magic, the most magic thing of all.
As a welcoming congregation, we lift up LGBTQ+ observances throughout the year because all of who you are is sacred and all of who you are is welcome. This morning, I invite you to join us in acknowledging an observance recognizing the I in LGBTQIA. That stands for intersex, a general term used for a variety of genetic, hormonal, or anatomical conditions in which a person's reproductive or sexual anatomy doesn't seem to fit the typical definitions of female or male. When a child is born intersex, many doctors and parents respond with panic and rush to correct the perceived problem with surgery, which often causes mental and physical difficulties later in life. Some intersex individuals identify as transgender or gender variant. Others do not. Intersex people make up nearly 2% of the population. Intersex Awareness Day is celebrated this Thursday, October 26th, and marks the anniversary of a public demonstration by intersex people and their allies at the annual conference of the American Academy of Pediatrics on October 26, 1996, at which they condemned non-consensual surgeries on intersex people. We uplift the work of these activists, and we side with continued efforts to raise awareness and agency for all intersex people. As Unitarian Universalists, we decry any medical practice that performs unwanted and unnecessary procedures on intersex children and adults. We believe the body is sacred and bodily autonomy is a human right. We will continue to work until everyone has access to this right. May all of our intersex siblings feel supported, empowered, and cherished. Please hear this blessing by Jude Sylvan. May you know your body as home, each curve, each angle, each organ, each chromosome. Know that no one can tell you who you are, no doctors, no paperwork, no state-issued identification. Their limited constructs are not you. The universe has made you perfectly. If your wholeness challenges others, let them grow and evolve to receive your truth. Your body is its own wisdom, whole and holy, blessed and beautiful. Blessed be, may it be so. Jarrett. That was beautiful. As we approach the time for our offering, give what you will for the church that has meant so much to you, for the church that meant so much to those who came before you, and for the church that will mean so much to people you will never know. Give what you will, for you are generous people. I now invite our offertory ushers, David Rullison and Ted Clispy, to come forward for our offertory plates to accept your gifts. After the offering, I invite you all to rise in body or spirit and join me in the offering hymn, Spirit of Life, number 123, in your gray hymnal. Our reading today is written by UU Minister Reverend Scott Taylor. We gather as a house of... Wait a minute, I think I'm reading the same thing I wrote at the beginning. We're going to skip the reading. So we'll go right into our sermon. So Beth, or Elizabeth Curtis, as she's also known, is our speaker this morning. She's a familiar face and a beloved member of our congregation. She wears many hats in our community. In addition to being a member of the worship team, which we are so grateful for, she is our co-director of religious education, which we are so grateful for, and our office administrator, which we are also so grateful for. We're very grateful this morning about that. She's also a member of other committees and is instrumental in a variety of projects, including the auction that's currently underway here today. Being a lifelong UU has allowed her to deepen her spiritual life and continue to explore and evolve. We've enjoyed her gift for writing and delivering sermons during worship, and today her message is in the spirit of our October Soul Matters theme of heritage, the blue boar and other family lore. Beth, the pulpit is yours.
Glasses. Mary Perkins Bradbury was a wicked woman. Her true colors began to show perhaps when in her younger years she spurned the advances of George Carr and married Thomas Bradbury. Mary and Thomas went on to become the pillars of society. But Mary Bradbury continued to thwart and torment George Carr and his family. Mary prevented John Carr, George's son, from betrothing her daughter Jane. But she was not done with John Carr, oh no, because she then caused him to become weakened by a disease of disordered fancies, eventually dethroning his reason and causing his eventual death. We know this to be true because John Carr's ghost appeared at the bedside of the young Anne Putnam. His ghostly specter told Anne that he had been murdered by none other than Mary Bradbury. Mary Perkins Bradbury was familiar with the devil and was known to poison people with her voodoo butter that she sold from her farm. She unleashed a storm that caused a ship to lose not only its main mast, but 15 horses as well. Mary Perkins Bradbury was familiar. Oh, I said that already, Kate. Perhaps the more damning evidence is this. Richard Carr, with his father, George, Mary's original spurned suitor, passed by the Bradbury home on horseback one Sabbath day. As they got closer, they saw that Mary was in the yard. Well, Mary transformed herself into a blue boar, and before they could reason what stood before them, the boar charged his father's horse, causing him to fall off. Many accusations were made against my G9 grandmother. I use G9 as shorthand for how many greats there are. Mary Bradbury, my great to the 9th grandmother at the age of 77, was accused, prosecuted, and convicted of witchcraft in September 1692 in Salem, Massachusetts. By the way, I don't think it would be a big surprise if I told you all of her accusers were somehow related to the Carr family. Of the 30 people found guilty of witchcraft and sentenced to death, she was the only one to have not only escaped death, but to have actually escaped the jail in which she was being held. No one's absolutely sure how she escaped. She remained in hiding until the witchcraft trials were proven to be the sham that they were. I think of my G9 grandmother, Mary Bradbury, with exquisite tenderness. It must have been an unworldly ordeal for her and her family to go through that. Being falsely accused, especially during a time of such mass hysteria, is unimaginable. But honestly, it ended well for her. She lived on for another 8 years before she died, nearing her mid-80s. And it all must have made for one hell of a story. I have learned to love ancestry. I have to say my sister Kathy and cousin Carolyn have done most of the legwork. So many wonderful stories. They have added such a richness to my family identity and by proxy to my own stories. Admittedly, I have always been family-centric. I've loved family stories ever since I was young. But with the passage of time, especially In societies like ours, with no strong oral traditions, stories are apt to fade and disappear after a generation or so. I didn't know of Mary Bradbury or of her story until recently. I wonder at what point did her descendants, my ancestors, stop telling her story? Was it so horrific that they made no mention of it to the very next generation, or did it fade by and by until someone wondered if it was really true? Which leads to what millions of people are doing these days, which is reconstructing these stories using the new genealogy tools available to us, including Ancestry.com, 23andMe, modern search engines, and the digitizing of somewhat obscure physical records. There are stories out there to be found. As Reverend Scott Taylor put it in an earlier reading, beneath this seemingly worn-out world, there are wells from which we can drink. Come, let our thirst guide us. Come, let those sweet ghosts whisper their gifts. We may not recognize the gift we are receiving when we hear that same family story that gets told every year. But knowing and passing on the family lore is known to be deeply involved with our sense of security, rootedness, resilience, and connection. There have been numerous studies that have found that children that know about their family history have a stronger sense of resiliency and control over their lives, and a more balanced sense of who they are. People have been honoring their ancestors all over the world for thousands of years. But in our Western culture, most of us don't have the benefit of traditions that regularly connect us with our ancestors. I find it really interesting that workshops have been popping up for the last few decades, teaching the art of ancestor veneration and ancestral worship. Now, you probably already honor your ancestors in one way or another, but we just don't think of it that way. If you look upon a photograph to remember a loved one, you are practicing ancestor veneration. If you visit a grave site or left a pebble of remembrance, you're honoring an ancestor. If you pass down a recipe from the old country, shared family stories, celebrated your heritage by learning a folk dance, or how to decorate Ukrainian Easter eggs, you're honoring your ancestors. Next week, we'll be having an All Souls service of memory, where we will honor the memory of those who we've loved and lost. We'll follow the time-honored tradition of placing photos and mementos on an altar here before us. We will light candles and cherish the love which connects us with those who have parted. We'll be honoring our ancestors, perhaps familial, but perhaps not. In ancestral veneration, we get to choose who we consider to be our ancestors. We can dedicate our thoughts, our love, our prayers to family members that have passed, but also to friends, to people we have admired, to congregational members who have passed, to the founders of movements that are important to us. One good example of this is the LGBTQ ancestral reverence workshops that help guide people to find their affinity ancestors. In honoring our ancestors, we can hold in our hearts those who have passed in our lifetime or all those who have passed before us. in our family, in our tribe, our culture, or diaspora. You get to define what ancestor means to you. Connecting with one's ancestors does not rely on your belief in an afterlife or an enduring spirit. We can have meaningful conversations, internal or verbal, a communing of gratitude and love, a conversation of regret, apology, or forgiveness, or simply a chit-chat about your day with the one person who might understand. I would say that the validity of that dialogue does not rely on someone being at the other end of that line. But for people who do believe in the enduring spirit, it can be a meaningful part of their spiritual lives. Ancestral connection can be informal, fluid, and highly personalized, like having one's loved one's favorite meal on or near their birthday and taking a moment talking about them, especially with children. Ancestry not only brings forward our family stories, but it can also illustrate history in a wonderfully contextualized way. It allows us to see patterns within our own family, as well as examine the complexities of society of which we may be a part, which may deal with the history of privilege or poverty, of strife, oppression. We must recognize that the ability to trace our ancestry is, in many ways, privilege itself. Just look at this country's history. We may see that many of the horrific actions of the colonial legacy entailed stripping people from their families. It's a fact that people taken from their families are less powerful. We must recognize the people who were stolen from their lands, their families continuously broken up by force during the brutal years of slavery. Indigenous peoples endured wars and relocation, amongst other sufferings that scattered families and loved ones. Indigenous children were pried away from their families and forced into schools to unlearn their culture and heritage. Looking at my heritage, it's apparent that, for the most part, I'm a product of colonial white Protestant privilege. Now, this is certainly not a cause for shame, but what it does cause is for me to view my heritage as it unfolded in history and within my own family in the light of what that heritage entailed and what that heritage entitled my ancestors to and continues to entitle me. It gives me insight into what harmful vestiges that might survive today. What ghosts still linger about? Mary Bradbury and her family probably had the means with which to orchestrate her escape from the gallows, while others did not. Is that something to feel guilty about? I contend that the answer is no. But it does link her descendants with those who did lose their lives in that horrific chapter in history. And I honor them by telling this story. And it makes me all the more aware of those wrongly accused today by prejudice or circumstance who may not have the means for proper legal defense. We gather as a house of stories, as a shelter shot through with memories that speak. Looking through my house of stories, the most haunting tale is not of Mary Bradbury. Last Thanksgiving, I was at this chancel and told you about my struggle in coming to terms with the fact that I'm not only related to the original Mayflower Pilgrims, but also to the later Pilgrims and colonists who fought and even led the forces in the King Philip's War, which killed so many Native Americans, men, women, and children back in the late 1600s. It set an early precedent for how our future country would treat the First Nations. Now, while we are not responsible for our ancestors' actions, I feel that I am linked to the remaining indigenous nation in that area today, and I honor them by telling this story. I have an ancestor who lived in New Hampshire in the 1700s. Living with his family was Negro boy, Peter. Back in the 1700s, Peter could have been a servant, but Peter was most likely a slave. I grew up having been taught that slavery was only in the South, and the Pilgrims were nothing but heroes. But now I know of Peter, and I am forever linked to Peter, and I honor him by telling this story. Well, I'm sorry. While I'd never erase these bits of family history, I'd much prefer to tell you about the positive things my ancestors did. There were a whole lot of abolitionists, some Underground Railroad action, and a whole bunch of really, really nice people. But that's not what needs to be discussed today, because it's really easy to honor them. Is it possible to honor my ancestors with whom I have issues? By way of their actions, are they exempt from our first principle? Am I not to honor their inherent worth and dignity? They're the complicated ancestors, indeed. Sometimes we must confront our ancestors as the complicated beings that they were, having lived in complicated worlds. Only with this confrontation can we begin to see through the lingering detritus, say, of colonial thinking, oppression, and racism that survive in today's world, to find our way to help fix and heal our very complicated world. By connecting with our ancestors, there are lots of lessons to be learned. The stories we tell ourselves about our ancestors have the power to shape us and to shape our descendants, namely our children and their children. As a future ancestor, I want to leave the more complicated stories intact and accessible for future generations to interpret. These stories need to be told because it's through denial and erasure that malignancies are allowed to linger and to continue to haunt us. I hope that the stories of my heritage and our common American heritage can grow into a larger narrative of acknowledgement, transformation, hope, and healing. Blessed be.
Thank you so much, Beth. I'd like to invite you to rise in body or spirit for our closing hymn and have our song leaders come forward. It's going to be hymn number 324, Where My Free Spirit Onward Leads. And we're going to ask Eileen to play it through once. And I believe that we will probably sing all verses. I think there's 3. Let's see. Yep. As we come to the end of our worship service, I'll invite Helen Met to extinguish the chalice as I share the words of UU Minister Reverend Leah Durland Jones. For those who came before us, we offer gratitude and thanks. May their memories be a blessing. May we feel surrounded by their love. As we go forth from this time and place, let us be inspired by their courage, their wisdom, and their dreams. Let us honor them by doing the work of living boldly, loving mightily, and creating heaven on earth. Amen, and blessed be.